Of ash and echoes, the 82nd Morbian Light, the astrochronometer of Lieutenant Dorjan Kyeff, had ceased to function 47 hours ago. His wrist-mounted device, standard issue to all officers of the 82nd Morbian Light, was now nothing more than dead metal against his skin. Kyeff traced the cracked glass with a dirt-encrusted fingertip. Not that it mattered much. Time measurement was a luxury they could no longer afford. 5 days had passed since the Imperial vengeance had been gutted by Drukhari raiders. The cruiser's death throes had been mercifully brief. Lance batteries carved through its hull like a scalpel through flesh, reactor cores destabilizing in blinding flashes that silhouetted the Xenos vessels against the void. Escape pods had jettisoned in panicked disarray, most destroyed before clearing the vessel's gravity well. The screams of trapped personnel had filled the Vox channels, prayers to the God Emperor mixing with orders and obscenities until static consumed them all. By the Emperor's twisted mercy, 3 pods containing elements of the 82nd had survived, plummeting toward the uncharted death world below. "Ammunition count," Kyeff ordered, voice barely above a whisper as he crouched beneath the gnarled roots of what passed for vegetation on this Emperor-forsaken rock. The twisted black trees bled a viscous amber fluid when struck, their branches terminating in thorn-like protrusions that resembled sharpened bone. The fluid smelled of copper and decay, familiar scents in a completely alien setting. 62 lasgun charges between us, sir," replied Sergeant Malus, her face a mask of dried blood and fatigue. A jagged scar, fresh and poorly cauterized, ran from her left ear to the corner of her mouth, the work of a Drukhari blade during their last encounter. Commissar Volk still has his bolt pistol with 8 rounds, 2 functional flamers with approximately 30% capacity each, 3 crack grenades, and 6 frag. Kyeff nodded grimly. "Serviceable weapons?" 26 functional lasguns, sir. 4 with bayonet attachments only, power cells depleted. 37 guardsmen remained from an original regiment of 3,000. The planet, designated only as DX-2187 in their fragmentary star charts, was a nightmare landscape of jagged obsidian rock formations and flesh-eating fungal plains. The air itself carried a metallic tang that burned the lungs with each breath. In the distance, mountains that resembled serrated blades cut into the perpetually amber sky. "And the Vox?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Still nothing beyond short range, sir. Just ... Milas hesitated, swallowing hard. Just the whispering. The whispering. It had begun 16 hours after planetfall. Soft, seductive voices at the edge of perception. Several troopers had wandered off in the night, following phantoms only they could hear. Their screams came hours later, distant and lingering, the sound of souls being slowly unraveled. Private Lothar had been the first to go, a solid veteran of 6 campaigns who had simply stood up during his watch, removed his helmet, and walked into the fungal forest with a serene smile on his face. The pieces of him they found the next morning had been arranged in a grotesque display that defied anatomical possibility. "The Xenos are toying with us," growled Commissar Volk, his aquiline features hardened by decades of service. One eye was now a ruined socket, courtesy of shrapnel from the crash. The wound had been cauterized with a heated combat knife, the smell of burned flesh adding to the miasma of despair that followed them. The dark kin enjoy the hunt more than the kill. Volk had executed 3 guardsmen already, those whose minds had begun to fracture from exposure to the planet's subtle horrors. Each execution had been performed with precise shots to the base of the skull. Not mercy kills, but necessary excisions of weakness before it could spread. After each execution, Volk had recited the same prayer. The Emperor knows their purpose is complete. No one had challenged him. No one had the energy for moral indignation anymore. "Emperor, protect us," muttered Trooper Zeven, barely 17 Terran years. His face still bore the soft features of adolescence beneath the grime and terror. The boy had been shipborne, never setting foot on a planet's surface before this nightmare. His hands hadn't stopped shaking since the crash, but his aim remained true, a testament to the rigorous training regimen of the 82nd. "The Emperor protects those who protect themselves," Volk replied automatically, though his voice lacked conviction. The Commissar's hand never strayed far from his bolt pistol, its weight a constant reminder of his duty, should all hope be lost. A tremor passed through the ground beneath them, subtle at first, then building in intensity. The guardsmen instinctively pressed themselves against the earth, las guns clutched in white-knuckled hands. Each vibration sent pangs of anxiety through their exhausted bodies, conditioned now to associate movement with pain and death. "Movement western perimeter," hissed Sergeant Quell, one of the few squad leaders to survive the crash. Half his face was obscured by blood-stained bandages, concealing wounds sustained when their pod's control panel had exploded during the landing. "Fast and low!" Kyeff raised his magnoculars, scanning the undulating fungal plains that stretched before them. The landscape pulsed with unnatural life, purplish caps and tendrils that seemed to reach toward passing shadows. Dark shapes moved with unnatural fluidity, like liquid shadow given form. "Wyshers," he breathed, recognizing the lithe silhouettes of the Drukhari gladiatorial cult. Their weapons caught the amber light, curved blades designed not for efficient killing, but for prolonged suffering. "Emperor's blood. There must be 30 of them, 3 clusters, moving in coordinated sweeps." "We can't outrun them, sir," Maelis said, stating the obvious. "Not with our wounded." Kyeff's gaze shifted to the makeshift medical area, where 7 guardsmen lay in various states of injury. Trooper Jarran's leg had been shredded by some carrion beast that had emerged from the fungal beds during their second night, the limb now a mottled mass of infection, despite Medica Thorvald's best efforts. Specialist Rowan had suffered third-degree burns across 60% of her body when their pod's reactor shielding had failed. Her bandages now leaked a yellowish fluid that attracted small, flying creatures with too many wings. Among the wounded was Major Thordan, the highest-ranking officer to survive. His legs had been crushed in the crash, his mind lost to fever and traumatic shock. He alternated between babbling prayers and sobbing for his mother on some distant agri-world. "We make our stand here," Kyeff decided, his finger tracing the rough terrain map scratched into the dirt. "Sergeant Quell, take your squad and set defensive positions among those rock formations, overlapping fields of fire, concentrated on the narrow approach. Maelis, prepare the flamers. We'll funnel them through the pass and catch them in a crossfire." "The terrain offers minimal cover on the eastern flank," Volk observed, his tone clinically detached. "We'll be exposed if they circle around." "Then we'll have to make sure they don't want to circle around," Kyeff replied. "Corporal Nemeth, position our best marksmen on the high ground. I want precision shots. Make the Xenos think the direct approach is safer." Nemeth, a gaunt woman with sniper's eyes, nodded grimly. Her last carbine had been modified with a scope salvaged from a fallen officer's weapon. "Target selection, sir?" "Leaders first, then specialist weapons. Aim for anything carrying a dripping, shimmering, or glowing weapon. Make them hurt enough to stay focused on the direct approach." "Sir," Maelis hesitated, her voice dropping. "What about Major Thordan and the wounded?" A heavy silence fell over the group. Commissar Volk's hand drifted to his bolt pistol, the implication clear. Death by the Emperor's mercy would be preferable to what awaited them at the hands of the Dark Kin. The Drukhari did not take prisoners. They took playthings, materials for their vile artistry of pain. "I'll see to the wounded personally," Kyeff said quietly. "The Emperor knows their names." As the guardsmen moved to their positions, Kyeff knelt beside Major Thordan. The older man's once proud face was now a mask of pain, his imperial medals still pinned to the tattered remnants of his uniform. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandages around his crushed legs, a crimson testament to the Medica's dwindling supplies. "The shadows dance," Thordan whispered, eyes unfocused. "They dance and cut and smile, like mother's knife on harvest day, peeling away the skin, layer by layer by layer." "Rest easy, Major," Kyeff said, removing his own water canteen and pressing it to the officer's parched lips. The water was cloudy, filtered through fabric to remove the larger impurities. "The Emperor stands with you." "No Emperor here." Thordan's eyes suddenly cleared, focusing on Kyeff with startling lucidity. His hand shot out, gripping the lieutenant's wrist with surprising strength. "Only the hungry dark. They've been here before, Lieutenant. This world, it remembers them. It welcomes them." Before Kyeff could respond, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the western perimeter. Not the sound of a guardsman dying. Something else. More primal. More alien. "Contact!" Quell's voice crackled over the squad vox. "They're... Emperor, save us. They're coming from below. From beneath the fungus beds." Lasfire erupted in staccato bursts, the distinctive whine of energy discharge illuminating the twilight gloom with red-white flashes. Kyeff drew his laspistol and sprinted toward the perimeter, leaving the wounded behind. His boots squelched in the loamy ground, each step releasing clouds of spores that shimmered in the air. "Fire discipline!" he shouted into his vox speed. "Controlled bursts! Save your charges!" As he crested a small rise, the scene before him froze his blood. The fungal plane had come alive. Massive purple-black fruiting bodies erupted upward, splitting open like putrid flowers to reveal Drukhari warriors cocooned within. They emerged slick with spores and ichor, their alabaster skin and obsidian armor glistening in the dim light. The fungus, the entire ecosystem, was their ally, engineered or evolved to serve as living deployment pods. "Throne of Terror," Kyeff breathed, momentarily transfixed by the horrific spectacle. A las gun beam sliced past his head, jolting him back to awareness. At the same moment, a Drukhari warrior leapt from a fungal pod not 10 meters away, its lithe form unfolding like some terrible predatory insect. The Xeno's elongated helmet turned toward Kyeff, eyeless, yet somehow conveying malevolent recognition. "Fall back to secondary positions!" Kyeff shouted, firing his laspistol at the approaching Xenos. The first shot went wide, scorching the alien fungus behind it. His second shot struck home, burning a hole through the elongated helmet, but the creature merely staggered before continuing its advance, moving with the fluid grace of a predator born. Lasfire crisscrossed the battlefield, the disciplined volleys of Imperial Guard training giving way to panicked, suppressive fire. For every Drukhari that fell, 3 more emerged from the living pods, their movements synchronized like dancers in some terrible ballet of death. "By squad! Fall back by squad!" Kyeff ordered, adjusting his tactics. "Cover fire and withdrawal." Squad Mizar initiated the withdrawal first, 4 guardsmen providing covering fire, while 3 others fell back 20 meters, then reversing roles. The disciplined withdrawal began to form, years of drills and training asserting themselves through the fog of terror. Then the screaming began. The sound of Drukhari weapons discharging, not the clean hum of Imperial technology, but something wetter, more intimate in its violence. Poisoned splinter pistols and agonizer whips that turned pain into an art form. A guardsman, Trooper Eshton, was hit by 3 crystalline splinters, the projectiles embedding in his throat and chest. He didn't die immediately. Instead, he convulsed, eyes wide with terror as the toxin spread through his system, paralyzing but not killing, preserving his nervous system's ability to feel every exquisite moment of pain. "Medic!" cried Trooper Zivan, moving to his fallen comrade. "No!" Kyeff yanked the young soldier back, just as a curved blade sliced through the air where his head had been. The Drukhari warrior that had thrown it was already closing the distance, drawing a second blade that hummed with dark energy. Kyeff fired twice more, the las gun's energy cutting through the Xenos' shoulder, but barely slowing its advance. The creature's reflexes were inhumanly fast, its movements economical, yet somehow theatrical, as if it were performing for an audience. "Save your shot!" Sergeant Malis appeared at his side, her flamer belching a stream of promethium that engulfed the approaching warrior. The Xenos shrieked, a sound like glass shattering, as its flesh blackened and bubbled beneath the sacred fire. Even as it died, its movements retained a terrible grace, almost a dance of death. "They're flanking us!" Trooper Desmarov shouted from their right. "Eastern approach!" Kyeff spun to see a second wave of Drukhari emerging from the tree line, these warriors adorned with trophies of bone and steel. They moved with the confidence of predators who knew their prey was cornered. "Nemeth, shift fire east," Kyeff ordered, knowing even as he spoke that it was too late. Their carefully planned defense was collapsing, the Drukhari having outmaneuvered them from the start. A guardsman, Fyodor, one of their few remaining Vox operators, collapsed beside Kyeff, a crystalline splinter protruding from his throat. His eyes bulged in silent agony, the toxin already paralyzing his vocal cords. His fingers clawed at Kieff's boot, a silent plea for mercy. Kyeff put a mercy shot through his brain and kept moving, knowing each las gun charge spent on mercy was one less for defense. This was the cruel calculus of survival against the dark kin. "Fall back to position Epsilon," he ordered, naming their final defensive position, a natural bowl formed by obsidian rock formations that offered cover from 3 sides. It had been their last resort, a place to make a final stand. Across the battlefield, Imperial Guardsmen began a fighting retreat. Quell's squad provided covering fire, their las gun beams cutting through the twilight in disciplined volleys. One beam struck a Drukhari warrior in the face, the energy weapon burning through the Xeno's features and dropping it to the ground. A cheer went up from the nearest guardsman, quickly silenced, as another dark kin warrior emerged from the smoke, driving a barbed blade through the celebrating soldier's chest. "Frag out!" Corporal Nemeth called, hurling a grenade into a cluster of advancing Xenos. The explosion sent shrapnel and alien body parts flying, momentarily clearing a path for retreat. By the time Kyeff reached position Epsilon, half his remaining force was dead or dying. He'd lost sight of Quell's squad entirely. The last Vox transmission from them had been cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a wet, gurgling sound that would haunt Kieff's dreams if he lived long enough to have them. Sergeant Malis was still operational, her flamer belching promethium in wide arcs that temporarily drove back the advancing Xenos. The sacred fire created a barrier of sorts, the Drukhari reluctant to charge directly through the flames, despite their legendary tolerance for pain. Commissar Volk stood atop a boulder, his bolt pistol barking death as he recited litanies of hate from the Lectitio Divinitatus. "Flesh fails will endures," Volk shouted, his bolt round taking a Drukhari warrior in the chest, explosive tip detonating inside the Xeno's body and turning its torso into a spray of dark ichor. Faith is our shield, hatred our weapon. Where's Quell? Kyeff demanded, sliding into cover beside Melis. The sergeant's face was streaked with soot and blood, her eyes wild with the particular madness that came from staring into the face of certain death. Gone, sir, she replied, not taking her eyes off the advancing shadows. They took him. Screaming, but still alive. 2 of his squad tried to retrieve him. They didn't make it back either. Prisoners. The word itself was a death sentence, worse than any battlefield execution. Stories of Drukhari torture chambers were legendary among Imperial forces, not mere propaganda, but horrific truths whispered by the few broken souls who had somehow escaped such fates. What about the wounded? Kyeff asked, dreading the answer. Melis's face hardened. Commissar Volk saw to them before falling back. He gave them the Emperor's mercy. Kyeff nodded, a hollow feeling in his chest. Major Thordan had been a good officer, stern but fair. He deserved better than this ignoble end on an unnamed world. They all had. A fresh wave of Drukhari warriors approached their position, moving more cautiously now. Their initial rush had been blunted by the unexpected ferocity of the Imperial defense. Now they probed and tested, looking for weaknesses in the final redoubt. "Conserve ammunition," Kyeff ordered, his voice carrying to the remaining defenders. "Wait for clear shots. Make every charge count." The guardsmen obeyed with the discipline beaten into them by years of training. Their last fire became more measured, more precise. A Drukhari scout fell as it tried to circle around their flank, its head vaporized by a perfect shot from Corporal Nemeth. Another Xenos warrior screamed as Lasfire severed its leg at the knee, the creature dragging itself forward on its belly, still determined to reach its prey. For a brief, irrational moment, Kyeff felt a surge of hope. Perhaps they could hold out. Perhaps they could make the Drukhari pay such a price in blood that they would withdraw, seeking easier prey elsewhere. The thought died as quickly as it had formed. Night was falling now, the planet's twin moons casting a sickly green luminescence over the battlefield. It made the Drukhari's armor shimmer like the carapaces of predatory insects, their movements becoming more bold, more theatrical. They were performing now, dancing between Lasfire with contemptuous ease, their own attacks deliberately non-lethal. "They're driving us deeper into the bowl," Trooper Desmarov observed, his voice tight with controlled terror, "cutting off our retreat paths one by one." He was right. The Drukhari had formed a loose semicircle around their position, gradually tightening the noose. The Xenos warriors fired their splinter rifles with unerring accuracy, their toxic projectiles finding gaps in flak armor or exposed limbs. Not killing shots, but disabling ones. Weapons designed to preserve their victims' ability to feel pain. "They want us alive," Kyeff realized aloud, the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. Emperor's mercy, they want us all alive. "Not happening, sir," Melis said through gritted teeth. She reached into her webbing and produced a grenade, one of their last crack charges, salvaged from the wreckage. "Not with what I've seen them do." A piercing war cry echoed across the battlefield, rising above the cacophony of combat. The Drukhari lines parted as a new figure strode onto the field. Taller than the rest, her head crowned with bladed protrusions, her movements possessing a hypnotic quality that drew the eye despite the horror of her presence. She wore form-fitting armor that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, and in her hands she carried a glaive that hummed with malevolent energy. "Succubus!" Volk spat the word like a curse. "Their cult leader." Behind her came a fresh wave of Drukhari, these dressed differently than the warriors they'd faced thus far. Witches in form-fitting armor that left more flesh exposed than protected, wielding wicked glaives and hydra gauntlets. They moved with impossible speed, clearing the distance to the Imperial lines in great bounding leaps that defied physics. "Concentrate fire on the leader," Kyeff ordered, knowing it was futile even as he spoke. The succubus moved like quicksilver, each step placing her precisely where no lass beam fell. The witches following her were barely slower, their reflexes honed by countless gladiatorial combats in the dark arenas of Komarok. The witches fell upon the Imperial line like living blades. A guardsman named Brevich managed to fire a single shot before a witch's glaive separated his head from his shoulders. Trooper Lascaris emptied his lasgun into an approaching witch, scoring hits across her midriff and left arm, only to have her smile at him, actually smile, before her bladed foot lashed out and opened his throat in a spray of arterial blood. The few remaining guardsmen fought with desperate courage, bayonets fixed as their last charges depleted. Trooper Zyvan, the young ship-born soldier, managed to impale a witch on his bayonet, driving the blade up under her ribs with a primal scream of terror and defiance. He looked almost surprised when he succeeded, his youthful face registering shock that he'd actually killed one of the nightmarish Xenos. His victory was short-lived. Another witch pounced on him from behind, wrapping impossibly strong legs around his torso, while her gauntleted hands found his eyes. His screams joined the cacophony of battle, then fell silent as he was dragged away into the darkness, still alive, still feeling, still useful to his captors. "Mylis, covering fire!" Kyeff shouted, trying to organize some semblance of a defense as their perimeter collapsed. "Volk, eastern approach." The commissar acknowledged with a curt nod, turning to face the new threat. His bolt pistol barked once, twice, 3 times, each shot finding its mark with unerring accuracy. A witch fell with her chest cavity obliterated. Another lost her lower jaw to an explosive round. The third shot struck an approaching warrior in the abdomen, the bolt exploding inside him and spraying his comrades with superheated gore. 6 rounds remaining, Volk announced calmly, as if discussing ammunition inventory during a training exercise rather than their last stand against the Dark Kin. Kyeff emptied his last pistol at the approaching succubus. One shot glanced off her ornate headdress, another burned a shallow furrow across her cheek. She smiled at him, her teeth filed to points, her eyes devoid of anything recognizable as human emotion. The furrow on her cheek sealed itself as he watched, the wound closing as if time were running backward. "Fall back to the western passage," Kyeff ordered, knowing the command was futile even as he gave it. There were too few of them left, too many Xenos between them and any possible escape route. But the human survival instinct was strong, and perhaps a few might slip away in the confusion. "Run!" he ordered his remaining troops, abandoning any pretense of tactical withdrawal. "Scatter and run. That's an order." It was their only chance, to split up, to deny the Drukhari their spectacle. Perhaps a few might find hiding places in this hostile world, might survive long enough for what? No Imperial rescue would come. Their vessel was destroyed, their astropathic distress call silenced before transmission, but the instinct to survive, to deny the enemy victory, burned strong in Imperial hearts. "For the Emperor!" shouted Trooper Desmerov, firing his lasgun on full auto as he charged toward the thinnest part of the Drukhari line. The desperate gambit almost succeeded. His first volley caught a witch in the face, dropping her to the ground, while his bayonet thrust took another in the thigh. For a brief moment, it seemed he might break through. Then the succubus was there, moving with impossible speed. Her glaive swept in a lazy arc that belied its lethal precision, removing Desmarov's right arm at the shoulder. The trooper didn't even have time to scream before a second cut hamstrung him, bringing him down to his knees. The succubus circled him, appreciative, like a connoisseur examining a fine vintage. Kyeff turned away, unable to watch what came next. The remaining guardsmen broke in different directions. Corporal Nemeth and 3 others headed east, using the last of their frag grenades to clear a path. Volk stood his ground, providing covering fire for the retreating troops, his bolt pistol speaking with measured precision as he recited the final litany of the commissariat. Myalis pressed the crack grenade into Kieff's hand as she moved past him. "For the Emperor," she whispered, then charged directly at the succubus, her combat knife drawn in a suicidal display of Imperial defiance. The blade was standard guard issue, carbon steel with a monomolecular edge, capable of parting flak armor and flesh with equal ease. Against a Drukhari succubus, it might as well have been a child's toy. The Drukhari leader laughed, a sound like glass breaking, and sidestepped the attack with contemptuous ease. Her glaive flicked out, severing Mylis's hamstring tendons in one precise cut. The sergeant collapsed, still trying to drag herself forward as the succubus circled her fallen prey. Kyeff ran. He hated himself for it, but he ran, the crack grenade clutched in his sweating palm. Behind him, he could hear Volk's bolt pistol fire its final rounds, followed by the commissar's defiant recitation of the Imperial Creed, his voice rising to a crescendo before being abruptly silenced. The fungal forest closed around him, its twisted landscape disorienting in the green moonlight. Kyeff ran until his lungs burned, until his legs trembled with exhaustion. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of pursuit, not the heavy footfalls of armored troops, but something lighter, almost musical. The Drukhari moved like predators, conserving energy, knowing their prey would eventually tire. When he could run no more, Kyeff collapsed at the base of one of the bleeding trees, its amber fluid dripping onto his shoulder like viscous tears. His chest heaved with exertion, each breath a stabbing pain that suggested broken ribs from either the crash or the subsequent combat. The last pistol in his holster was empty, the power cell drained to its final dregs. All that remained was the crack grenade, a last defiant gesture against the encroaching dark. In the distance, he could hear them coming, not hurried, not concerned, but moving with the casual certainty of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to go. Worse than the sounds of pursuit were the sounds of anguish, familiar human voices raised in torment, guardsmen already captured and undergoing the tender ministrations of their captors. He recognized Desmarov's voice among them, the once stoic trooper, now begging for death in hoarse, broken tones. Another voice might have been Nemeth's, though distorted beyond easy recognition. The whispering voices in his mind grew louder, promising surcease from pain if only he would stop running, if only he would surrender to their gentle ministrations. Kyeff looked down at the crack grenade in his hand. One last act of defiance, one last service to the Emperor. He began to recite the litany of sacrifice as he armed the detonator, the familiar words bringing a strange comfort. Though my flesh may fail, my spirit stands eternal. Movement in the underbrush gave him pause, not the fluid grace of the Drukhari, but something else, something massive and ponderous. The ground trembled beneath him as the thing approached, primitive instinct telling him to flee even as exhaustion held him immobile. From between the twisted trees emerged a nightmare, 8 meters tall, a chimeric horror of chitin and metal, moving on 6 articulated legs that terminated in hooked talons. Its upper body was vaguely humanoid, though its head was a cluster of sensory organs rather than anything resembling a face. Most disturbing were the dozen or more human forms suspended in translucent sacks across its abdomen. Imperial Guardsmen, still alive, their eyes wide with unspeakable horror as they witnessed their own vivisection in helpless paralysis. The Talos pain engine, the Drukhari's most beloved torture device, had found him. Ancient and malevolent, it moved with the deliberate patience of a craftsman approaching their workbench. Its appendages were a grotesque collection of surgical instruments, each designed not to kill, but to extend and enhance suffering. It was more than a machine, more than a construct. It was the physical manifestation of the Drukhari's sadistic artistry. Behind the monstrosity came the succubus, her armor now adorned with imperial dog tags and pieces of flak armor as gruesome trophies. A severed human hand hung from her belt, the fingers still twitching spasmodically as residual nerve impulses fired through dead tissue. She still smiled that pointed tooth smile, her eyes glittering with anticipation. Kyeff said nothing, his fingers tightening around the grenade. The succubus noticed the movement, her smile widening. "Oh, I wouldn't," she advised, gesturing to the Talos. "My pet so enjoys playing with live specimens. Dead ones are such a disappointment." The Talos emitted a sound, not quite mechanical, not quite organic, a modulated hum that might have been anticipation. One of its articulated appendages extended toward Kyeff, a gleaming scalpel glistening with some unknown fluid. Kyeff thought of his home world, Morbia Secundus, a hive world of perpetual twilight and industrial smoke. He thought of his family, his training, his oath to the Emperor. He thought of his comrades, those already taken, and those who might still be hiding in the fungal forest, prolonging their inevitable capture. "The Emperor protects," Kyeff whispered, pressing the activation rune on the grenade. The last thing Lieutenant Dorjan Kyeff saw was the succubus's smile faltering. The spectacle gave Kyeff a momentary flash of animalistic joy before his world was enveloped by an all-consuming white light. The explosion echoed across the fungal plains, briefly illuminating the alien landscape before darkness once again claimed dominion. The crack grenade, designed to penetrate vehicle armor, turned the Talos's front section into shrapnel, liberating its captives in a spray of metal, chitin, and viscera. The succubus, caught in the blast radius, was thrown backward, her perfect form broken and burned. She would survive. Her kind were notoriously difficult to kill, but she would bear the scars of this encounter, a reminder of prey that had denied her the ultimate pleasure of their suffering. In Comorra, within the twisted spires of the witch cult arena, the raid's failure to capture this final prey would be noted in their records, a small act of defiance against the infinite dark, a momentary denial of their pleasure. Perhaps the Archon who had ordered the raid would punish the succubus for her failure. Perhaps the scars would become marks of shame that mere humans had damaged her porcelain skin. But whatever her fate, it would remain unknown to the records of the Guard. On the Imperial charts, DX2187 would remain merely another uncharted death world, the fate of the 82nd Morbian Light, officially recorded as missing in action, presumed lost with all hands. A notation in a ledger, a paragraph in the regimental history, a memory preserved only in the minds of those who had served alongside them in campaigns past. But the death world remembered. The bleeding trees absorbed their blood, the fungal plains consumed their flesh, and in the whispers that haunted the shadowed places of that cursed planet, echoes of their final defiance would remain, a ghost story told by a world that had witnessed the courage of men standing against the endless hunger of the dark. In the grand calculus of the Imperium, the loss of a single regiment was insignificant, a statistical rounding error in the perpetual war for humanity's survival. But for those who had fought and died on that nameless world, their sacrifice was absolute. Their names might be forgotten, their deeds unrecorded, but their defiance, their refusal to become playthings for the dark kin, was a victory of sorts in a universe that offered few. For in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, sometimes the only victory possible is to deny the enemy the pleasure of one's defeat.